everyone. Welcome all participants, architects of the winning projects, panelists comprising esteemed members of the steering committee and master jury, and our partners from the Aga Khan Award for Architecture to this first session of a 3 sessions webinar series celebrating and learning from the winning projects of the Aga Khan Award for Architecture 2017-19 cycle. Thank you for sparing time to be here with us today. This idea germinated in my conversation with Farooq Darakshani, as he had promised a post-award seminar this year in Pakistan, and because of the prevailing pandemic, this was not possible. Well, clouds do have silver linings. Not only we have speakers and panelists who otherwise may have been constrained to travel, but participants from almost more than 15 countries and also remote areas of Pakistan. Our registration exceeded the Zoom capacity of 500, and the rest can follow live on Facebook. The awards, a vision of His Highness the Aga Khan, has immense following, and for the first time, the seminar has become a webinar reaching out to many architects and students at the same time. In putting together this exciting series, I am particularly grateful to Farooq Darakshani and the AGA team, my colleagues at the Institute of Architects Pakistan National Council, especially President Chingezi for his full support, and Honorary Secretary Bisma Askari for the untiring efforts in single-handedly managing the graphics, publicity, and the entire online setup and more. Now, the President of Institute of Architects Pakistan, Architect Arif Chingezi, will formally welcome you all to the IAP AKAA webinar series.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and a very good afternoon from Karachi, Pakistan. We are delighted and honored at the Institute of Architects Pakistan to host the first webinar series of the award-winning projects of Aga Khan Award for Architecture for the cycle 2017 and 19, in collaboration with Aga Khan Award for Architecture, one of the most prestigious awards in our profession, founded by His Highness the Aga Khan in 1977. The webinar series, as you all know, presents the winning projects by their architects, joined by the members of the steering committee, master jurors, and project reviewers from Aga Khan Award for Architecture cycle 2017 and 19. Today is the first of the three session series in which we are going to witness the two award-winning projects and listen to the proud architects and the panelists. My special thanks to both the presenters of today, architect Nora Al-Sayeh from Bahrain for her project Revitalization of Maharrak, and Natalia Fishman from Russian Federation for her project Development of Public Spaces, who will be presenting their award-winning projects not only to IP members, but also to the architects from the Member Institute of Arcasia, a 21-member Architects Institute of Asia, Commonwealth Association of Architects, and UIA. IAP feel proud to be associated as a member with all the three international bodies of architects. My thanks also go to the architect Francisco Benderin, member steering committee, and architect Muna Fawaz, master jurors, along with the two project reviewers, Mr. Saifur Rashidi and Dr. Anna Grinstein, for joining us in today's webinar session. I'm particularly thankful to architect planner Farooq Darakshani, Director Aga Khan Award for Architecture, and my two colleagues in IAP, architect Khadija Jamal Shaban, who is the chairperson of Board of Architecture Education in IAP, and architect Bisma Askari, Honorary Secretary IAP, for their hard work and extraordinary effort for the past many weeks in making this webinar series possible. We are pleased that as much as 500 plus participants have joined us today, and they are going to join us today in this virtual session, apart from the unspecified number of viewers joining through IP's Facebook, where it is being streamed live. In today's multiple challenges to the profession of architecture in the wake of global warming, rapid urbanization, environmental degradation, energy crisis, and coupled with the latest ongoing pandemics crisis, there is a greater need for a closer partnership among the architects and the institutes and bodies they are part of. I hope this collaboration with Aga Khan Award for Architecture for the webinar series will explore possible avenues for more cooperation, which could positively impact the built environment around us. In closing, I wish to express my gratitude to all the participants for being part of this session. I am honored to have had this opportunity of welcoming you all. I hope we have the most absorbing session with interesting and stimulating discussions and exchange of knowledge with the two star presenters and the esteemed panelists, so that together we could take greater inspiration out of these fantastic projects being presented today. I'm thankful to all of you for your hearing.
Okay, before I hand over the mic for the rest of the day to Farooq, just one housekeeping thing. That is, if there are any questions, please put it out in the Q&A part, and all the questions will be taken up for any panelist. If there's a particular one you want to address, please say so to the speaker or the panelist, or general questions, and Farooq will moderate. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Farooq Darakshani, who is the director of the Arhan Award for Architecture. He has been associated with the award since 1982, where his work has brought him into contact with architects, builders, and planners throughout the world. He travels extensively in Muslim countries and has organized and participated in numerous international seminars and colloquia dealing with contemporary built environments. He has collaborated on a large variety of publications and exhibitions on architecture and has been involved in organizing professional workshops and international architectural competitions. He lectures widely and has served as a jury member at schools of architecture in Europe, Africa, and Asia. Mr. Darakshani's main field of specialization is the contemporary architecture of Muslim societies, and his professional work has included the design and construction management of large-scale public works and infrastructure projects in Iran, as well as architectural design in Paris and Geneva. He also serves on boards and committees of a number of cultural institutions. In 2018, he was named an International Fellow of RIBA, Royal Institute of British Architects. Farooq Darakshani is trained as an architect and planner at the National University of Iran and later continued his studies at the School of Architecture in Paris, UPI. Over to you, Farooq, for the rest of the session.
Thank you, Khadija. Good afternoon, good evening, and good day to everyone. Because as Arif Changizi, President Changizi said, you've been coming from 15 different countries. This is a great pleasure, and it's a way to disseminate what is the message of the Arkan Award for Architecture. After each award ceremony, that all the winners are celebrated, we try to go to each different country and celebrate with the people there, and then go around the world organizing seminars, exhibitions, to not only to present the project, but to see what we can learn from these projects. Because each of these projects are they're not only site specific. There's a lesson to be learned that can be implemented in many other places. So this is the first of these webinars that we're having. We're going to reach more people, I hope, and this will help us in getting questions and answers from, as we said, the most remote places where people do not have the opportunity to access us. I would just make it quite short, going to the presentations. The first presentation that we're going to have is the Bahrain, a project in Bahrain, the Muharraq, revitalization of Muharraq. I have had the opportunity to visit almost all the winning projects and the shortlisted projects. And Bahrain is one of the projects which has really impressed me a lot. I had seen it many years ago. I had been in Bahrain in 2007, 2008, and I've seen the project, how it is involved. It is on the vision and an ongoing vision of Her Excellency Sheikh Mai Al Khalifa, she was a Minister of Culture, but at the same time, the dedicated team that has been working with her all these years. Noura Al Sayed, she is the key person in this project, and I've known Noura through this project, but she's been born and brought up in the vicinity in Geneva, where now our offices are, and she's gone to the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne. That's where she studied architecture, and then from there she has had experiences in architecture in Holland. Later, she went to Bahrain, and since then she's been working as an architect. She's responsible for all the affairs of the Ministry of Culture, which is now called the Bahrain Authority for Culture and Antiquities. She's the head of the architecture affairs. Besides that, she's been curating a number of very important exhibitions. And I remember when in Venice, some of you have been architects who've been you heard about the Biennale in Venice in 2012, that the Bahrain Pavilion won the award. She was the commissioner, and she was in charge of that. Recently, she did also in Amman, the design, the design week in Amman was created by Noura. And one of the other ones, which I hope that she will explain a little bit more, is when she was responsible for the pavilion, Bahrain Pavilion in Milan exhibition, which and this is an exceptional, because I would like her to, if she can, in the middle, explain that how a project has been transplanted from Milan all the way to Muharraq. Now I hand it over to Noura. Please go ahead.
Hello. Hi. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Farouk, for this very nice introduction. And thank you very much, Khadija, for organizing this. It's a really nice occasion to reconnect with so many people after these few months of being a bit disconnected, and to be able to share a project that we've been working on here in Bahrain, as Farouk introduced. The project that I'm going to be talking about is the revitalization of Muharraq, which comprises two different projects. The Pearling Path, which was initiated in 2011, and prior to that, the Sheikh Ibrahim Center for Culture and Research, which was established in Muharraq in 2002. And both these projects, as Farouk very well introduced, are really the vision of Her Excellency Sheikh May bint Mohammed Al Khalifa, who in 2002 really wanted to reinvest and rehabilitate the old city of Muharraq in Bahrain. So the old city of Muharraq, as you see here, this is a beautiful image from the 1950s, is one of two main cities in Bahrain and the islands of Bahrain and archipelago. And the islands of Muharraq have been known throughout history for pearl diving. So Muharraq's development has been associated with the economy of pearling since the time of Dilmun. The Dilmun civilization had its capital in Bahrain 3,000 years before Christ. And to the left of the screen, you see one of the oldest pursed piers that were uncovered in an archaeological site in Shakhura in Bahrain from 3,000 before Christ. So it's a 5,000-year-old pierced pearl that really testifies to the really long legacy of pearl fishing in Bahrain. And to the right of the screen, one of the later eras of the Talos civilization, where you also see this is one of the beautiful pieces of pearl jewelry that were uncovered in Bahrain. So really the history of Bahrain has been linked to that of the history of pearling. This is a really beautiful image from 1913, oyster shells in front of one of the German pearl traders that used to come to Bahrain to buy pearls. It looks like it's an enormous amount of pearls, but actually to find one pearl, you need to uncover approximately 10,000 oysters. So this is probably around 3-4 pearls that you see here on this image. And the pearling industry really reached its apex in the 1930s. There's a very famous story linked to the purchase of the Cartier flagship store in New York that was traded in 1917 with this 2-piece strand of pearl necklace that you see here that was owned by, the townhouse was owned by a lady called Maisie Plant, and such was the value of pearls at the time that she exchanged this 2-piece strand pearl of necklace that was estimated in 1917 for $1.5 million for the walk-up that she had inherited from her husband on Madison Avenue, that up to today are still the headquarters of the Cartier flagship store in New York. So this pearl industry, there was a craze for pearls until the 1930s. And what's really beautiful, and here is the link to urbanism, is that this economy built the city of Muharraq. So this is an aerial view of the city of Muharraq in 1970s. And everything you see here on this image is directly related to the economy of pearling. So these very small pearls built a whole city and built the economy and the society that lived around it. Obviously, it happens with many countries as a result of the collapse of the pearl economy, the rise of the oil economy in Bahrain, urban development. The city of Muharraq today looks a lot different than it did up until the 1970s. The relation to the sea has changed very much, but as you can see here, we're quite lucky that the core of the urban fabric has been preserved. And it still remains up until today one of the most extensive urban patterns from the Islamic era on the Arabian side of the Gulf. And so the idea behind the project that was initiated in 2007 was to rehabilitate the old city of Muharraq through the history and the legacy of pearling. So the project Pearling Path Testimony of an Island Economy was registered on the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2011. It was a serial nomination that comprises 17 monuments that each relate and narrate part of the story of pearling in Muharraq. So there's the house of the pearl diver, the house of the captain, and all of these houses are connected by an urban pathway that takes the visitor through all the old historic neighborhoods of Muharraq. The plan then, as it went through implementation beyond what was registered on the UNESCO, grew to accommodate a number of public spaces that were essential to the contemporary needs of the city, multi-story car parks, and a number of other cultural infrastructure that helped make the city once again a living city. So as you see, this is one of the images from the alleyways of Muharraq. Obviously, from the height of the pearling economy until today, the architecture legacy, let's say, was dilapidated, like happens in many historic cities. It was in need of a lot of maintenance, of rehabilitation, and so on. But like I said previously, we were really lucky that the urban profile of the streets, of the heights of the buildings, and so on, were still preserved, and it was really a richness and a heritage that we were working very much to preserve. So one of the main challenges of the project, because it's a serial nomination, was to look at how we could connect all these different monuments within the city. And we worked on this with a Belgian office, two Belgian offices, Bureau Basmets, in collaboration with Office Kirsten Geers, David Ben Severin, that proposed from a start an intelligent approach to this, which was, not to create a continuous new urban entity within the urban fabric, but to add on the existing fabric a number of small wayfinding elements that are lighting poles, and more importantly, to create a series of public spaces in open areas in the city that would serve as places of encounters between the residents, visitors to the path, and tourists, to create places where people could meet in the city. So these are an example now of the lighting elements that have been installed in Muharraq. They're really quite helpful because they guide people in a natural way to follow the pearling path. And this is one of the examples of the public squares. This is an image, obviously, before the installation of the square. These spaces were spaces where there had been houses that were built that had been demolished, that were left vacant. Most of the time, these open plots would be quickly filled up by cars, because parking is one of the main problems that the city faces. And by reintroducing spaces, these, let's say, non-places became very lively spaces in the city where people could sit on a bench, could interact. There's a canopy of vegetation that creates a microclimate underneath. And these are some other images of these squares. Alongside the public spaces, obviously, the core of the project is really the rehabilitation of these historic monuments. This is an example of the Fakhro house, which was the house of a pearl merchant who was dealing not directly in pearls, but in timber and ropes and other materials that were related to the pearling industry. This is one of the most beautiful architectural examples of the Majlis, so the meeting place of the Siyadi family, which were one of the most prominent and wealthy pearl merchants in Muharraq. This is the inside of the Majlis. So this Majlis was built in the 1940s, 1950s, so towards the end of the pearling era, but it shows already the wealth that the pearl merchants had, that they were starting to express their wealth on the outside of the buildings, which normally in Bahrain and in the Arabian Gulf, expressions of decoration or wealth were normally confined to the inside of the homes. So it shows the position that the pearl merchants were earning in society. This is a proposal by Studio Anna Holtrop that's currently under construction. One of the old houses, the Murad house, that will be transformed into a small guest house along the path. So it was really important for us that all these different properties that were inscribed as monuments under the UNESCO World Heritage List, that they have different programs that make sure that the city is lively, that they're not only exhibition spaces, but that they fill a variety of programs that are missing and needed in the city. Alongside the preservation of the monuments, the preservation of the urban fabric was probably the most challenging aspect of the project. So the path itself snakes through the old city of Muharraq over a distance of 3.5 kilometers. Over this 3.5 kilometers, there are around 400 facades or let's say buildings that form part of the urban fabric that are really also an essential part of the project. So this is part of the project that we call the Facade Upgrade or urban rehabilitation. These 400 facades were all surveyed by a team of volunteers in collaboration with the University of Bahrain. And each one of those facades we then drew and proposed an urban rehabilitation screen just to maintain, for example, to remove ACs from the facades, to clean up storefronts, to rehabilitate and conserve old buildings that are made out of coral stool, in an effort to really make, that the project is not only about monuments, it's about the urban fabric and the whole, and really that the project should serve as a catalyst for the urban rehabilitation of the historic city in its entirety. In addition to that, there are some larger projects within the Pearling Path that correspond to more contemporary needs of the city. This is, for example, the Pearling Path Visitor Center that acts like a community center for the city on the whole, was designed by the Swiss architect Valerio Olgiati. The location of the visitor center is in a very important historic location for Muharraq. It's located on the site of the former warehouses that we call Amarat. And these warehouses were, like you see this historic picture here of the site, were at the threshold between the sea and the souk, the commercial areas of the city. And they had a very particular longitudinal shape within the city to mitigate this passage between the sea for the goods and the commercial street. So you see, this is an aerial view of Muharraq today, where you can see an aerial view of the city. I think you can't see my cursor, but it's there somewhere in the middle. You'll see it when I get to the next slide. And although the rooms of the Amara exist on the site, what was really important in the project was to reintroduce this urban typology in the city and to reinstate it. So the project bridges the two sides of the plot through a 7,000 square meter roof that creates an important open public space within the city for people to gather, and at the same time creates a scenography of the rooms of the old Amaras that you see underneath. And this is here within it, the visitor center itself, that has a community center, that has a small exhibition space and workshop spaces for activities geared towards the community. And this is the view of the visitor center from the exterior on Avenue 10. For us, one of the important things within this project was really that it was really important for us to conserve and rehabilitate the old structures, but it was also very important to us that when we built something new in the city, we did so with a contemporary expression. We really believe that, you know, this is not only a question of style, but it's really a question of believing that we as a society today can also build monuments and buildings of value who hopefully in 100, 150 years will in turn be valuable enough to be preserved. You know, alongside the projects that tackle the culture, like I mentioned, parking spaces are one of the contentious issues within this. So as part of the project, we're also introducing 4 multi-story that will add 1,000 parking to the city and will help in easing traffic and congestion and the lack of public spaces within the city. Alongside that, we also have projects that tackle the intangible heritage of the city. For example, in this case, the Fajiri traditional singing that used to be on board the curling dowboat. They were in Bahrain, in Muharraq, they were held in what we call a dar. So this is a project for the expansion of an existing dar in Muharraq along the Purling Path that was designed by Office Kirsten Khair's David Van Selleren. And typologically, it was a bit of a challenge because the dars normally happen traditionally in a majlis setting, which is a setting that's quite interiorized. And yet at the same moment, there was a need or an ambition for more visibility for these forms of dance and singing in the city. And at the same time, we did not want to compromise the traditional typology of the majlis. So the design intent that came out is a building, like you see, that can be completely sealed off when there are practices or when there are classes going on. And when there is a public performance, the whole facade of the building goes up. The interior glass facades as well open up completely to the street, and the performance completely opens up to the streets of Muharraq, where the audience becomes the whole city itself. And this is one of the night views of the project. And this is, Farouk will be happy to know that I had included this in my presentation. Alongside that, we have other cultural infrastructure, contemporary cultural infrastructure that we've also introduced to the city. This is an image of our pavilion at the Milan Expo in 2015 that was on the theme of agriculture and food sustainability. So it was a series of 10 fruit gardens in an open plan pavilion. An important part of our pavilion was that the pavilion will be dismantled after the 6 months of the expo, shipped back to Bahrain and rebuilt at a location where it would serve as a botanical garden. And actually, when we had this idea to dismantle it after we chose the winning competition project by Studio Anna Holtrop, we didn't actually have a site yet in mind. And by a very happy coincidence, we had started working on the Purling Path at the same time. And looking for an available plot, it came to mind that we had purchased this plot that we had no use yet for, that by a very lucky coincidence nearly fit the pavilion exactly. We just had to make a few amendments to the length of the pavilion, but otherwise it fit perfectly in width. So you can see it here inserted next to the house of Sheikh Isa bin Ali Al Khalifa, the house of the former ruler of Bahrain, really at the heart of Muharraq, where it exists today amongst all the other historic buildings of the city. And I'm going to end with a last project that I actually designed in collaboration with an architect and friend of mine, Leopold Banchini, which is a small exhibition space for architecture that's part of the Sheikh Ibrahim Center for Culture and Heritage. And the brief here was to design a space within Muharraq that would tell the story of architecture in the city and how it evolved, and would house at the same time the archives of Belgrave, who was an architect that lived in Muharraq in the 50s and that surveyed a great deal of historic houses. And this was obviously a challenge to try to understand how you exhibit architecture within a historic city. And what was beautiful about the plot that we had, it was a very narrow plot that had two adjacent buildings on either side. So a plot that was quite representative of the urban plot within the city. And what was really beautiful when we discovered the site was that there were all these old walls that were existing on either side of the building, and each one of those walls had a different texture, was built in a different era, and these walls actually told best the story of the evolution of architecture in Muharraq. So the idea behind the project was to offset our building from the two adjacent existing walls. Normally, the way the buildings are built in Muharraq, you would have built another blind wall against these walls, so the texture of the existing walls would have disappeared. So we decided, like I said, to offset the walls and to glaze them, and that the project would have a bridge-like structure that would cantilever from either side of the site, revealing all the existing walls of the building. And at the same time, you know, one of the challenges sometimes of exhibiting or of exhibition spaces that are interiorized in these traditional courtyard spaces is that they can be a bit disconnected from the street and from the local communities around them. So it was also equally important for us that the exhibition space could completely become one with the outside street, both the adjacent streets on the side of the building, but also the pedestrian streets. And when there are any exhibitions in this space, the whole space opens up and becomes a natural part of the street. So that's it. There are obviously, it's an ongoing project, and there are a lot of projects that are still under construction that we're very happy to see completed, hopefully within the next year. But this is where the project is at the moment, and thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity to share it with you today.
Thank you, Noura. It's a difficult project to present because you have not shown so many other buildings in it, and Pakistan is not very far from Bahrain, so when everything is okay, I think some of the architects should go and visit. Noura will be. And I think you can make an architecture tour of Muharraq for them. Thank you very much. Saif, now you tell us all the things that Noura didn't say. She said all the good things. You can say whatever you want. You're free.
Okay. Well, hello everyone, and thank you, Noura, for a really enlightening presentation. I mean, it was really a privilege to visit Muharraq and to meet Noura and her other colleagues. And I think it's a remarkable project for many, many reasons. One of them is that it's very thoughtful, and often government-sponsored projects want to accomplish things in a big rush. I think one of the remarkable things about this project is that it recognized that to do things well, you have to take time, especially at an urban scale. It's incremental, you learn, you develop, you do new things. And the 20 years or so that the project has been going on have definitely been to its benefit. It's definitely to the credit of the people behind it that they realize that it's not the kind of thing you can achieve in a year or two. And I also think it's remarkable that it's government sponsored, because generally government projects are efficient, but they're not often as thoughtful as this one. Another thing which impressed me very much when I visited was the fact that it had thought of the local community. And many of the squares that Noura showed, actually they serve the local community, including migrant workers and people from other countries, by providing very pleasant, small spaces where people can relax, can meet a friend. And I think this idea of how can urban renewal and how can urban revitalization be to the benefit of local residents is a very important one, and the Muharraq project does it really well. More so, the project also partners with different stakeholders, including many of the former residents and landowners and people with historic links to Muharraq, many of whom have a very strong identity and feel that they belong there, even though they may have no longer lived there or have moved out 30 or 40 years ago. And there's definitely a renewed interest, a commitment on the part of people from Muharraq. And I think if you come to assess and to evaluate a project, what you really want to see is that beyond the initiators of a project is a response that's encouraging and sustainable and will take it forward. And I definitely felt that, for example, the boutique hotel that Noura showed is a joint project between her authority and the owners of the house, who are extremely excited, and they have a WhatsApp group with hundreds of family members. And they can't wait for this project to go ahead because they see it as a revival and a renewed interest in their own family history. So I think that's great. The conservation is also really thoughtful. And I think this contrast of amazingly meticulous, accurate conservation with bold modern architecture that fits into a historic setting is very rare in historic environments, because usually people are too afraid to introduce modern elements, whereas in this case, they've managed to handle it so well that a modern building like the music hall or any of the pavilion or any of the others that Noura showed or designed fits in very well within the historic urban fabric. And the restoration work, which she didn't show as much, is also amazingly well done to an excellent standard. The other thing, and maybe this is the last thing I'll say, is that cities evolve and change. And this project recognizes that it's not only about initiating good projects, but it's also about putting in place a mechanism that makes sure that change is managed and that you don't suffocate and stifle people, but on the other hand, you don't destroy what is valuable. And the building controls process is a very well thought out one. It takes into account what is important and what ought to be preserved, and the forms and the typology and the urban fabric. But at the same time, it's not too prescriptive. So it doesn't prevent people from doing new things or from making change and from living, basically. And I think the outcome is that it has modern things and it has new things, and you can see intervention, but it's not a sterile project. It's not a project that looks as if you move a chair in the wrong direction, suddenly the whole thing collapses. It's a dynamic initiative. And I think when I went to review it, what I came away with is I hope other people see this project and learn from it and are inspired by it, because it's multifaceted and it has many great lessons to learn, to teach.
Many thanks, Saif. Later, we're going to have, during the panel discussion, time to talk about it. Especially this project can be inspiring for now all the problems which are in Karachi, and that all the new, some of the older part of Karachi has been the ideas of having projects to be renovated. I think this will be a very good model. Now we're going to go, we have to go a little bit faster. I'm going to go to the next project, which is the public spaces in Tatarstan. Now, I was very lucky to go to Tatarstan, which a lot of people don't know where it is. When you talk about Tatarstan, people just think about many other places, not knowing that this is one of the major cities of the Russian Federation. It has been historically republics. Historically, the Kazan, the city of Kazan, which is the farthest northern east place which has became Muslim, the city of Bulgar. And it is a combination of the people who live there are the different ethnic groups and different cultures and different faiths, all living together peacefully for such a long time. Here we have coming with another phenomena, which is my dear friend Natalia Fishman-Bekmamova. And she is exceptional because she can be a role model for a lot of these people now looking at the screen. I don't know how you can compete with her, because after her studies, at the age of 19, she started working. At the age of 19, she became the advisor to the culture director of the city of Moscow. And then she worked there. she was at this for the architects is known the Strelka Institute for Media and Architecture and Design. She was working there on all their education programs and worked on the Gorky Park and the other parks. And she was also at the same time going to Germany and studying in Germany and studying in different places. And that's where, with all the things she's done, the president of Tatarstan went to Moscow and asked her to join him in a project in Tatarstan. Over 300 or 400, I don't know how many parks in different cities of Tatarstan are the brainchild of Natalia. Natalia, I'm not going to take anything from you. Just go ahead, please, and make your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Farokh, for the introduction. First of all, I wanted to apologize for the setting. I mean, I got stuck in St. Petersburg because of my husband's birthday, so I have to be in a cafe. I beg your pardon. Second of all, I wanted to express enormous gratitude, and this is not a formal thing to say because I've been horribly missing belonging to the AGA Architecture Award community. It's such an incredible thing to be part of a community and also to be recognized by people worldwide, because, you know, you work in some, you know, like small, unimpressive village somewhere on the, you know, edge of Tatarstan, and then comes Farokh, and then comes Anna, and then come all those incredible people who are online with us now, and you understand and you realize that you're doing something really globally important, and this is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. I'm extremely grateful, Farokh, and I'm grateful to all of you. I'll try to be quick, although I cannot guarantee it. Is my presentation visible now?
Yes.
Good. Thing is, we've been working for the last 5 years with the most unbelievable president of Tatarstan, Mr. Rustam Minikhanov. Actually, Farokh, it's not only you who doesn't know how many spaces exactly there are. There are 300, I'm also in doubt sometimes, it's 396 spaces that already have been created, and I'm going to show you some of them. And 62 more public spaces are right now under construction. We are working all across the Republic of Tatarstan. There are 45 municipalities which have the aerial centers where we started from, and then we are moving on further to the smallest villages, spreading this quality of life standard. What is important to understand about us as a team is that we're trying to be as multidisciplinary as possible, which is not a typical approach for Russian red tape, you know. And the key thing that we're always trying to explain to our partners from all across Russia, because we have now become the educational centers where all the regions of Russia are sending professionals to study. What we're always telling them is that we have to recognize local activists to be as important as the ministries. We have to recognize the local producers to be as important as any partner in the city, government. So it's extremely important to be really multidisciplinary and to have this respect for all different partners in this process. This is our team. In the center, it's Mr. Minikhanov, the president of Tatarstan. To the right is the mayor of Kazan, our capital, Mr. Ilsur Mechin. And to the left is Karina, one of the architects who have received this incredible opportunity to have a portfolio of dozens of realized projects at the age of under 30 years old. And I think that this is one of the important opportunities we're given, and this is why we are able to attract the best of the young professionals. So this is the first principle we're following. When I came to Kazan from Moscow, I realized that that there is hardly a team of architects I would commission to create a public space. Thing is that in the late Soviet Union, starting from, I'd say, mid-70s, there were no new public spaces constructed. And all the knowledge, all the people in the former Soviet Union countries have about it is more or less theoretical. We started the public spaces renovation process in Moscow in 2011 with my previous boss, Mr. Sergei Kopkov, the Minister of Culture of Moscow, as Faruk has said. And we had, working in Moscow with the Moscow money, Moscow budgets, and Moscow opportunities, we could commission the greatest architects we had in Russia. It cost a lot of money, but we could afford it. Now, when I came to Kazan and I turned to them to ask them to help me, I was extremely young and I was not prepared for this job and the circumstances I'm going to be in. So I came to one of those leading Moscow architecture companies who has created the incredible project of Gorky Park renovation in Moscow. And I said, Oleg, please help me. I've just moved to Kazan and they've asked me to renovate the central first historic park garden of Kazan. It's the Black Lake Garden. Please do come and make a project. He said, okay, Natalia, no problem. For you, it's gonna cost 12 million rubles. I said, Oleg, but you know, I need a discount. I've given you so many projects while we were working in Moscow. Please make it cheaper. He said, okay, we're friends. We've done so many incredible things. It's gonna be 6 million rubles. I was super proud. I went to the Minister of Construction of Tatarstan and I said, Irek, I've just, had an incredible negotiations. I've commissioned the best of, the crème de la crème of Russian architecture to make a project for us for 6 million. And he looked at me and said, you know what, Natalia, I've got 30 million for 120 projects, so it's not gonna work. I was stunned, really. So this is when we realized we need to create a local team and a new professional community of architects in Kazan. And we began by bringing back to Tatarstan the young, talented people who have moved out from there, moved to Moscow, to St. Petersburg, moved abroad, promising that they would have the opportunity to realize their projects, promising that they will get a lot of new experience, and also just giving them the opportunity to work for motherland. And Tatars really have a very strong feeling towards their own land. So they came back. It's a team of people, all of them under 35. It just happened so. There was no segregation. It just happened so. Many of them were students when they joined the team, and they joined to help as on an internship, and then they stayed and they have evolved to architects who are now, which is funny, Faruk, you didn't know that, who are now working in Nizhny Novgorod, which is one of the largest cities in Russia, for Vladivostok, which is, the far east of Russia. So they are now Bashkortostan, which is a neighboring republic, also Muslim predominantly. So now it's an incredible process when those young people evolving from our team are ruling this whole architectural process all across Russia. What we did to educate them is a very interesting process. We brought professionals, experienced architects from Moscow, for 2 to 3 weeks, and we made workshops where we distributed people into teams of 8 to 10 people, and they worked under the curation of the experienced architects on a certain project, and they got a lot of skills and a lot of experience they would have been earning for years from those leaders. And then it really, every time we had such a workshop, we had them 5 times, it really, gave a lot of input into the process of how they created projects and how they perceived the space. I'm going to skip a lot of information now because I realize I'm short of time. Another important thing about working with the people is formatting the directorate for parks and formatting the managerial team. And I'm going to show you later how it functions. Extremely important point, maybe Anna will later comment on that, is developing local manufacturing, because this is something that helps transform all the money we invest in this process into local economy, and also develops a lot of local skills, like this incredible street lighting furniture was created in the village of Muslumova, which is 8,500 people. And they produce, though they designed it themselves, they produce it themselves, and they sell it all across Russia themselves, because our project empowered them to be creative and to get the funding to be able to realize it, and then it just started working. The most important principle that we're profiting is participatory design. It all started with a very sad story. This willow tree was growing in one of the Kazan parks when I just arrived to Kazan, like 3 weeks since I stepped in, and the reconstruction started. And one of the workers, because the quality of contractors is extremely important to the final outcome, and as a state it's not easy to control it, especially as a very regulated state Russia is. So this willow tree was cut down, and we ended up in a tragic discussion with the citizens. So as the outcome of this process, we ended up creating a manual of leading participatory design process. So we have a very strict and specific procedure of how we make citizens our actual clients. So for me, the client is not the state. For me, the client is the citizen, and we have created the mechanism that really makes the citizen the client, because they come to certain meetings and we give them a map of the territory, we give them stickers with different functions, we ask them to work in groups and to create a functional task for the architect. And then the architect comes after this meeting in a month and a half and presents the project. And those people who are now the clients have to approve or not approve. Sometimes we changed the project 9 times until everyone was happy with it. Also, we not just discuss with general audiences, we work with specific communities. Like we have a large community of people who are into extreme sports, and we create facilities for them. And actually, tomorrow we're launching the largest extreme park in Russia. I'm going to show you the pictures at the end of the presentation. I'm going to skip a lot of the information because otherwise it's going to take too long. And I'm going to move to the pictures of the projects, just for you to get an idea, because I think that the time is too short to really tell a lot. This is a village of 3,500 people population. We have created an embankment that connects the 2 banks, because when in spring the water level rises, the 2 banks are non-accessible. It's hard to cross, and it's hard for children to get to school. And the hospital is on one of the sides of the river. So we created this embankment. The head of the mayor of this territory wanted to put a lot of concrete, as you could imagine, on the shores. We stopped him from that. We made it very ecological, and we still have, with this higher embankment, we have created the opportunity to cross and to be connected. This is the village of Muslumova I love so much. We have an embankment which is 5 kilometers long. Maybe Anna will comment on that because she's been there. It's a very specific experience. This is a riverfront we've made where the great Russian rivers Volga and Kama merge, and it's 42 kilometers wide, this place, where you can see no other bank. You feel like you're really at the sea. So we call it the Kama Sea, and it's 40 minutes drive from Kazan. It's 15,000 people per day in summer. And it totally changed the economy of the territory, because for a place which has 10,000 inhabitants, less than 10,000 inhabitants, having 15,000 people every day is a huge change to how it functions. So all the houses on the front line were sold turned into hostels, into cafes, into small shops, and people are working in the services industry now, and it's a great help for the place. It's really a lot of places like this park. I just make one small quick comment. It was also the mayor of this place also wanted to put a lot of concrete, but to a different place. We found the springs in the field. We dug out the land. We created this incredible pond, and all of this together with the street furniture and all the construction works cost us $500,000 US. So it's just for you to understand how extremely cheap we make all of it. This is the central square in the city of Bavli, which is 20,000 people. I don't come from Tatarstan originally, and I have to say that the central square of my hometown, which is a little bit more than 1 million inhabitants, doesn't have a square like the central square like the city of Bavli with 20,000 people has. This is Bugulma. This is the beach we've made in the city of Almetievsk. The planetarium in one of the parks in Almetievsk, the beach in the Zelenodolsk. This is a huge park we've created in the city of Nizhnekamsk. I'm really gonna go very quickly now, Farokh, because you look strict actually. Also, this is the central embankment of Nizhnekamsk and the beach we've added on. This is the embankment of the riverfront of in Naberezhnye Chelny, the second largest city. Actually, Farokh, this one you've not seen, it was not finished. This is the Azatlik Square in Naberezhnye Chelny, the Freedom Square, Independence Square. And we're very proud of this one. It has a long story to tell, but I cannot elaborate really. Again, Kazan, we're moving on to Kazan. Actually, I was speaking to the president of Russia, standing here in this place yesterday, telling him about protecting the rights of activists who are standing up against unlawful and unreasonable undertakings in city development. So this is another incredible park in Kazan, which was supposed to be a huge road, but we managed to protect it together with the activists. The Black Lake Park, I mentioned, the oldest park in Kazan. The White Flowers Boulevard, the one that came in place instead of a huge parking lot. All of this land was a huge parking lot. Then another project which is extremely important to us and which was not finished by the moment we worked with the AGA board for architecture. This is the ecological rehabilitation of the Swan Lakes ecosystem. This is a system of formerly 4 lakes with the mirror of the lake, with the water square of 40 hectares, which was gone, which disappeared, dried out, and we restored 3 of them with the water surface of more than 20 hectares now. And this is a huge, largest ecological rehabilitation project of a water system in Russia. This is what it looks like now, very popular among the citizens of Kazan. And this is our beloved Kaban Lake system, the project that came into living as a result of an international competition won by the great Dr. Kon Jang-yu from Turenscape. It's an incredible space we've created in the center of the city. This is the before and after pictures, some of them. And actually looks like, I have to be like really quick. This is what we're launching tomorrow, Farokh. This is the Extreme Park created by sportsmen for sportsmen. This is the concept, because they have not finished yet, but tomorrow I could send you the pictures of what it looks like in actual life. So we are creating this large extreme park because now extreme sports have become part of the Olympic program, one of the Olympic sports. And we really need to create the place where people could get prepared for all of this. could go through training. So we are creating the open extreme park, and also we're right now constructing roofed extreme park, which would give them the opportunity to train all the year round. So I bet in some 4, 5, 6 years, you're going to have a lot of Olympic champions coming from Russia, Tatarstan, and Kazan. I wanted to thank you again so much, because it's not just about the isolation we have all been experiencing in the past months, but the isolation from this incredible community was specifically painful.
Thank you, Natalia. For those of you who are sitting in Karachi, I just have to mention one thing. You saw all the pictures that Natalia had chosen, but she did not choose what all these places look 6 months a year, which is all white under snow, and nobody can go out. But it's incredible, because these spaces also work during the winter, and that's the most important thing about them. Anna, if you can go very quickly with some comments, so we can have time for some panel discussions.
Yes, thank you very much, Natalia, for this excellent presentation. And it was really a great privilege to be the reviewer for this project. I was fortunate to visit many of the projects, of course, not all of them. And to see the impact that this has had on the spaces, on the landscapes, and on the people. And as Natalia said, what she did was to make the citizen, the client of the project. And I remember her saying, we're not here to realize, the dreams of the architects, but really, to design for the citizens. And this reminded me of a quote by the great urbanist author Jane Jacobs in 1961. And she said, "Cities have the capability of providing something for everybody, only because and when they are created by everybody." And it's really wonderful to see that in this program, and unfortunately, there was a willow that was sacrificed for this. But the effect and the impact has been wide. And I wanted to mention and underscore that the impact is not only in Tatarstan, but also now that participative planning for public spaces has actually become a regulation in the whole of Russia. So now this Tatarstan model is being now applied in the whole of Russia, this participative planning. So it really has an impact at the national level of Russia. So obviously one of the impressive things is the scale of the work that Natalia and all her team has done in the whole of Tatarstan, and how it affects really different types of urban settlements, as you've seen in the presentations. And this is really important, not just obviously for the citizens and societies, but it also makes me think of the whole problem of rural migration. Just at the moment, there is a big exhibition called Countryside of the Future in the Guggenheim by Rem Koolhaas, really looking at what is 98% of the Earth's surface, which is not by cities. We always say, we will be an urbanized, or we will all be living in cities in the future. And one of the ideas behind this is also saying that we have to create good public space in every type of settlement, from a small village, agricultural village, to even a village like Muslimovo, which she showed, where there is some manufacturing, but which has now been transformed into also a new industry of manufacturing for public spaces. And also in renovating the public spaces of the industrial cities, which were built in the 1960s with public spaces, but which really had to be redesigned. And then to go to the scales of these large lakes and ecology, all these ecological projects where we're sort of remediating and restoring ecologies. The Kaban Lakes is also a fantastic project where they're using the reed beds to clean the water of the Kaban Lakes. And hopefully soon, people will be able to swim in these lakes. And it's also very educational, because people can actually see, this ecological process happening. And I remember talking to the dendrologist who was telling me this project is like a social bomb. you know, because people are really interested in their learning, and they're so enthusiastic about this functional landscape. So it's not just, of course, the landscapes have many different functions, going, as she showed, you know, from sports to culture. As Farokh mentioned, you know, there's 50% of Muslim and Tatars, and there are very important festivals which bring together all the different cultures. So these public spaces are also where this culture can be expressed. As you also mentioned, Farokh, the winter and the programming is very important, because it's not only the designing and also the programming. So these spaces are also programmed in the winter, and they're also quite beautiful. And we understand why there's so much color used. I visited actually in the winter when it was white, and Tatarstan in the winter is very black and white. So then the color becomes even more important, and the lighting, and there are concerts in the middle of winter by, you know, things we might not imagine. But the whole programming is both winter and summer. So they're really used all the year round. So as Natalia did also underscore, is when we talk about this urban-rural migration, is these industries, the landscape industries, the architects, it's also keeping the young people in the rural communities. It's saying, how do we make them attractive as big cities, so that we can keep not only the architects in the big cities, but also the youth, to make them proud of their villages, their towns, their cities, because this new public space actually creates a new urban identity for all these settlements. And it means that the youth also not only have new industries and new activities that they can get engaged in, but they also have an identity, an urban identity that they're proud of. What else can I say? Also, I'd like to just mention the fact that the Aga Khan Award was held in Kazan, but also that the president and Natalia hosted the World Urban Parks Forum, and there we saw actually people coming not from also from all over the world, specialists, but also from all around Russia. And you could see really these workshops where they were really learning about this Tatarstan model of participation. And with Natalia, they also have created a Eurasian chapter of the World Urban Park. So this is also another way that maybe this model can be sort of disseminated and applied in other areas in the Eurasian geographical context. So that's another sort of future impact. And then I maybe wanted just to talk about another future project, an evolution at a very different scale of this project is the Kazanka River project, which I interviewed some people working on that. And it's actually at the scale of the river. And they're using this participative process at the scale of this whole river and riverbed. And so it has, you know, industrial sites, it's got ecological sites, and they're inviting people to come and participate in the future vision of this huge public space, a blue-green infrastructure, through the participative process. So this is sort of, let's say, another scale of the project, how it's evolving in the future. And of course, I could say lots more fantastic things about the project, but I will stop here because I know that there are other people.
No, because I mean. As I mentioned at the beginning, both of the projects are so large and they've got so many ideas, and there's so many achievements. It's not one achievement, it's more that each of them needs a proper presentation, a proper discussion. And what you discussed, Anna, goes a lot on what is your specialty. As Anna Grechting, she's been a reviewer for the Alkan Award, and she's been also working with me on the education program of the Alkan Award for Architecture and Projects. She's been a professor of architecture in Qatar and in Geneva, and she's a Harvard graduate. And but she mentioned about, she was very keen on talking about the concerts that's happening in Kazan, because she's also a musician, and she was just before this telling us that she's also performed in Pakistan. So you have to ask her to come back to Pakistan and perform. Now I would like you to have, I have to go quickly through, we don't have that much time, unfortunately, but I would like the two people to join me in the conversation. A representative of the steering committee, Francesco Bandarin, and a representative of the not a representative, a member, each of them are a member of the master jury. Mona Fawaz, who she is a professor of architecture in American University in Beirut, and she has been on the jury. So you have been looking at both of these projects, and you've seen in the context. And what was important, I mean, because you had a general message that you would like to explain about all the projects, especially these two. At the same time, Francesco Bandarin, who's a member of our steering committee, and Francesco has been the Deputy Director General of UNESCO for many years, and he is also very familiar with both projects, because in putting Muharraq on the heritage list, also being to Kazan, and he has written a book on Bulgar and Kazan for the award ceremony. So he knows both of them quite well. And Francesco is a member of our steering committee. He's an architect, and being the head of the heritage at UNESCO, he knows all the heritage sites, so he can put this into context. And I would like you to put these two projects into a larger context, how it works internationally compared to the other ones, and also how it, Mona, you are very keen on that, how people live. What it means, big project, what's the meaning of these projects to people?
Yes, thank you, Farouk, for this question, and thank you for including me in the discussion. It was really wonderful to see again those projects and remember the wonderful contributions they really make to the work of architecture. I vividly recall the debates in the jury and the appreciation for the centrality of this notion of public that appears in both of the projects, recognizing urbanization and the making of public space really much less as a finished product than as a process that can only be made through processes of governance that both include states and people in inclusive way. As many of you know, often when we think of public space, there's this notion that it's something which is finished, which is locked into a certain geometry. And I think both interventions succeed very nicely in making us think that a public space is something which is shared, always in the making, as is urbanization, and that for it to be possible, it has to really involve multiple actors and to become a living space for its users. So in a time where we're, I think with the current COVID crisis and the extent to which cities that have managed to keep an infrastructure of good public space have succeeded in containing the pandemic and offering their residents a much better life than those who haven't. We see these projects even shining further in this contribution to the public. But I think that to us, what was really important is that both of them also built on a notion of collective history and shared identity that did not stay fixed in a certain place, but actually involved users and including professionals of the built environment, but also residents of the city in a way that they could reinvent the story of the cities where they are and engage new publics in this process of creating a new kind of public space, each adapted to the way in which in the place in which it is, and hence move a fixed understanding or imagination of public space into more of an integrative notion that includes an ecological dimension to it, but also social and economic elements into it. And finally, I think a big nod to the publics in both cases, public actors really in this time being interested in investing in the public, being interested in creating this infrastructure of shared spaces, which we live in a time where sadly more and more we hear about POPs or privately owned public spaces, places where public agencies, whether they are the municipality or local governments or central governments, are delegating to the private actors the responsibility of creating those publics. So recognizing the importance for public agencies specifically to create those shared spaces and to create them in ways that empower their users was a very important aspect of their success. They did this, and that's really my final thing because I'm very conscious of time, but they really did this with also paying a lot of attention to architecture, not creating spaces that are where you neglect this because you care for process. So they create ultimately spaces that have a unique architectural quality, that innovate in the architecture language, while at the same time also serving a multitude of users. So that's really, in a nutshell, some of the things we remembered. And of course, I'm not doing justice to these great projects.
Francesco?
Well, thank you very much. Hello to everybody, to Mona, all the colleagues. But first of all, let me say one thing. You know, the Aga Khan Award for Architecture is 40 years old, 41. Well, last year was 40 years old. And the World Heritage Convention is the same time, same period, because in fact, the first inscription was in 78. So, you know, these are two parallel stories that we have to look at. In a way, it's very interesting also to see how they crisscross, because there are cases, like the Muharraq is a case of crisscross, and how, in fact, they mutually, you know, influenced and fertilized, I would say. If we look at the long range of the Aga Khan Award, we can see that urban revitalization around heritage has always been, you know, a key element, a key context of reference for the award. Even before the award was even formalized, you had, you know, the Sidi Bou Said project in early 70s, Kairouan, and then all along the evolution of the award, which Farouk has now steered for 30 years. You had, you know, project with Sana'a, Shibam was also awarded, Nicosia, lately Birzeit, you know, about a few years ago. So I think, you know, it's a constant thing. And so we have to see Muharraq as part of this long strategy of, you know, trying to bring back heritage to the community, especially in regions and contexts where they were not very well placed and were not well maintained. I mean, the Gulf countries have rediscovered this heritage quite recently, because the wave of modernity has, in a way, erased a lot of this heritage. I think we are lucky that Muharraq was taken care of by our friend Sheikh Kamai, who was Minister of Culture, and she's, you know, not only she did this fantastic, promoted this fantastic work, but also she created, you know, in Bahrain a UNESCO center for training in world heritage, and we worked a lot together on that, because it shows, it's an example. It's a case study for many countries in the region that now discover that they do actually have, you know, important heritage places that deserve being protected and preserved and even regenerated in their, you know, and put back in the life of the community, except that they couldn't see them. So I think that what has been done there, it's very interesting from architectural point of view, from a heritage preservation point of view. But, you know, what's really very important is the message that is sent. And this message, believe me, is heard, because, you know, now, you know, we see even in Saudi Arabia, there's a lot of attention, you know, the site of Diriyah, for instance, now being regenerated. Jeddah was inscribed in the World Heritage List. I mean, can you believe it? Many people don't even think that there is an old Jeddah. Now there is. Now, it's true that this also belongs to the DNA of the Aga Khan. If you look at the other project, for instance, the cities program, you can see that there is, I mean, of course, you cannot award yourself, Farouk, Aga Khan cannot award itself, but some of the best projects in urban revitalization are done by the Aga Khan Trust itself. I mean, is there anything more impressive than the Al-Azhar Park in Cairo and the Darab al-Ahmar village and nearby, or even more, the Nizamuddin intervention in Delhi next to the Humayun? I mean, I think it's very clear that there is a, you know, an interest, you know, and a very strong message that comes not only through the award but also to the overall activity of the Aga Khan. So I think it's so important as a message, as a kind of a direction that, you know, I would like to stop here, because it's very clear that this has been, you know, not only captured by the award but also by the World Heritage Convention. Now, the other project, the public space, I think it's also I mean, the Aga Khan, one of the works, so extraordinary works of the Aga Khan has been all the gardens. You know, of course, again, you cannot award yourself, but lots of gardens around the world that, you know, carry this message. You know, that in fact you do care about public spaces, because public spaces is where, you know, social life is possible. So through the award, I think you've done quite a lot, perhaps even more than on revitalization. You got a lot of valorization, and you have valued the public space as a place important for the life of the community. A few years ago, you gave a prize, an award to the Tabiat Bridge in Iran. This is a bridge, becomes like a public space, an amazing project. But even before, a lot of parks for children in Cairo, in Beirut, you have it, and the culmination of this strategy was the Superkillen work that was done in Copenhagen. It was awarded in the previous cycle. It's an urban park that where in fact but again, it's not just the architecture, because if it was only the architecture, maybe there are other things that are the other. It's actually the social impact of it. The great social impact of it. I think nothing compares, of course, to the Tatarstan program, because that's a statewide program with hundreds of parks and so on. But we are in that line, in that direction. Quality of urban space is a factor of urban cohesion, of urban well-being, and human well-being, and it's extremely important to invest in that. I think the message that comes from the Tatarstan that has been awarded is has been captured quite clearly by the Russian. This has become like a national program now, so it's a model that will certainly reverberate in Russia and beyond, because it is really what people expect from their governments and even from their architects. Something that perhaps sometimes is very simple, but it opens up quality of life for the people. And when it's done with the participation of the people, it then becomes a collective value.
Thank you very much, Francesco. Unfortunately, we are always running out of time, and the discussions are so interesting, having all these discussions. I'm going to just, there's many questions, which I don't think we can have time to go through all of the questions, but let me just go through a couple of them, which has come. I mean, this is almost generic. The first is for Muharraq. The questions are, the first questions, of course, you can see this, as a sizable population comprises people who come from different parts of the world, including South Asia. How do this urban design intervention relate to the aspiration and needs for present-day social milieu, which is what you explained, Noura, and especially Muharraq. And I mean, I would not going to answer instead of you, but this whole thing that you've got the public spaces is where a lot of these people who are living in one room, they rent a room, many of them, they live in the same room. These public spaces that you've created has given them a space to breathe in the city, and that in the neighborhoods. Can you just go a little bit further and explain that?
Yeah, I mean, that was the really beautiful thing of these squares, when we implemented and we opened them, very soon they became like kind of urban living rooms, public living rooms. They were immediately appropriated by many different people living in the city for different needs. And that was also one of the reasons why it was important for us that these spaces were not had an openness to them in their programming, that they were not pre-programmed in a sense that they would dictate behavior, because the idea was really that they should fill in the gaps of all the things that were missing in the city in 50 years of lack of investment in the city and upgrade of the infrastructure and so on. But we often get asked this question about the people living in Muharraq, and there's a large population from South Asia. There's also a lot of people from Egypt, from Yemen. It's a very mixed city, and how we incorporate this in the design of the city. And I think, in the end, the most important thing is that public space needs to serve everyone. I mean, we don't, start designing public space for a certain segment of the population. I think that successful public spaces are successful because they're able to absorb all the different actors of the city, and all these different actors in the city are able to find their space and their own living of these spaces.
Yeah, another question on Muharraq was that we're saying that how does the design contribute to invigorate identity? How did local community react, workers react to this project? It is interesting what you were saying, because a lot of people have moved, a lot of people have come back, but generally the reaction of the citizens, the people who are living there, with all these new elements that you've brought in. Because one of the brave things which has been happening in Muharraq is that you are not shy of having very contemporary buildings which will fit into the context in the old Muharraq.
You know, it's a funny thing because someone asked us this question a few months ago, and then I thought about it a bit more in detail. And the really, you know, surprising and specific thing about Muharraq is that we got a lot more resistance towards the rehabilitation and conservation of the old buildings than we did towards the introduction of very contemporary architecture. I think, you know, Francesco referred to this a bit, but modernization here arrived, you know, with so much energy, let's say. And, you know, there is really an appreciation for newness and, you know, contemporary expressions in this part of the world. And so we really had hardly any opposition, you know, even the Dar building, which is a really strong architecture statement in the middle of the historic city. You know, people were really, were excited about it. The most resistance we had, and the most resistance Sheikha May had at the start of this project, was people were asking her, why are you throwing money into old buildings that, you know, will be demolished in a few years' time? Why are you wasting government money on rehabilitating these structures? And that really was the challenge of the project, you know, really trying to make people understand that we could breathe new life to these buildings, and that really they were really central to a national identity, and that they were something that needed to be preserved.
And I just add one thing, because they were discussing about identity and also the new functions that you brought in. I mean, one of the most interesting things is that CERN, which is this center in Geneva, which they're working on physics, and I mean, it's the most advanced. They have now a center in one of the buildings in Muharraq, and they're doing that. I mean, that is very inspiring to have these new functions, how it can house new functions, bringing new life back to the area. I've got also two questions from Natalia, and the first says that how were the local specificities of each public space taken into account in the context of the larger scale projects? And the other question is that how can you tell us a bit about your process of working with the expectations of both client government and local users? Because this is, I think, one of the areas that a lot of architects, they don't know how to deal with the two. On one hand, they're the users, and on the other hand, they've got the government authorities. The meaning of the authority in different countries is different. I mean, you have to listen, how much you have to listen to them. How can you challenge them, convince them what you can do? And you have been going through all these things as well. So I'll go with the rest of it later. There are so many questions.
Thank you so much. The questions you've selected are brilliant, and thank you to all of those who are still with us. Speaking of how we take the local specific, how do I even say it in English? Specific traits, I don't know. Look, there are different types of those. First of all, you really have to realize the scale of the place you're working for, because it means that the public space is going to have a totally different role in the life of the territory, and a different meaning, and also the way you would use this, the people would be using the space can also be very different. For instance, there was a settlement called a historic settlement called Kukmer. And once we opened up an embankment there, the next day there was a group of active citizens who came to the head of the territory and said, look, Dmitry, we are now going to apply for the status of a city, because we now have an embankment, which is the most shocking thing for them, that the lights did not go off at night, because this was the only light space in the night. And they walked there the whole night, people in this settlement of 18,000 inhabitants. And the next day they said, we are a city now, please go talk to the president of Tatarstan, we're applying to the status of the city. So it's really important to understand the role of the place. Also, of course, it's also extremely important to understand the ecosystem and the climate, because even within Tatarstan we have very different climates, and the time when the snow melts, there is a 3 weeks difference between Kazan and, for instance, Bugulma, or some even further away cities from the capital. So it's something also to take into consideration, because when we work there, the snow falls earlier and melts down later. It means the winter is even longer for them. So when we work with them, we invest much more into winter infrastructure actually than into summer infrastructure. Also, of course, the extent to which your design could be brave and innovative is slightly different, because what you can do in Kazan could be slightly shocking for a small village. But actually, what we have found out is we've made a lot of social studies to evaluate, to understand how people take, like, how they perceive the job we're doing, if they're happy with it or not, how it changes their everyday practices. And really, it's extremely important for the people here in Russia just to see something new. And they are even ready for something really brave and modern. It's just extremely important for them to feel that the things are new, because they're carrying this trauma of the times of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, of the early years of Russia when there was no money at all. So just give us something new is the key message. Well, I could really tell you so much about it, so I need to stop now answering the first question. And the second one was about, could you remind me?
No, it was about how you're getting the expectation of both the client and the government and the user.
Now, because I'm the government, I'm not an architect. I am the government. It's something that is easier to manage in this case, because formally I am the client for the architects. If I'm trying to be as honest as possible, I would say that the key thing to manage is to persuade the government. In my case, this is the president of Tatarstan, who is a bright person and easy to convince, that they don't need to have an idea of what it should be like. They don't need to make comments according to their taste or perception of what life should be like. They need to commission a professional and to trust him. I think that this is manageable, this part of convincing, because if you can demonstrate, if you can prove that your approach is a success, it becomes really quite easy, because you just tell the people, you trust me and I solve your problem. So this works. Speaking of the expectations of the community, of the citizens, I know it was not in the question, but I think that this is the most important thing to discuss. Also, my experience says I was very ill-perceived in the first 2.5-3 years. There was, because I was too young, and I was not coming from Tatarstan originally, and also I am Jewish, which is a strong thing for people in Tatarstan. They're very tolerant, but it was really hard to explain why you should hire a 24-year-old Jewish girl from Moscow to work in Tatarstan. Don't you have professionals locally? So I had a lot of problems with the media at first. And also a lot of criticism because of that willow tree we showed. I was not responsible for it being cut down, but obviously I had to take responsibility in order to make the people trust me later on. So it is extremely important to be very honest, even to demonstrate the limitations of your capability, and to not be afraid to talk in any situation, even if this situation is not complementary to you. And I think that it only started going well after 3 years of work, after 3 years of keeping every word promise. And the meetings that we had at first, which were full of skepticism, turned into a totally different configuration, because when you come to a meeting, to a group of people, like 200, 300, 400 people, and the first thing you say, please raise your hands, those who have been to the Gorkynsko-Metievsky forest. Like 3/4 of them raise their hands if it's in Kazan, or those who have been to the Gabdullah Tokay embankment in Nabережные Челны, or in every other city. And you then ask, do you like it? And then most of them really do say yes. And then you say, this is going to be the same team. We're not going to harm your beloved park. We're not going to do anything wrong. And we are going to listen to you as we listen to you in that case. This is the moment when it all changes, and when the skepticism goes away, and when people really feel that it's safe to be creative, and then that it's useful because they are going to be heard. And the last comment, speaking of the expectations of the architect, this is another very hard thing, because even though I have a team of very young people who believe in what we're doing, it's very often hard to persuade them that it is necessary to listen to the citizens, because they want to express themselves, because they go like, Natalia, why the hell did we study for 6 years in university and now we have to listen to this old lady from Kukmar? Really? She has no taste. She has not seen anything in her life, anything better than this village. Why are we going to listen to her? And this is really, because for them, it means it looks like, at some point, it looks like I'm underestimating their professional abilities and not respecting their vision. And this is something very important to explain to them. Also another thing, which is very important to balance, is the extent to which the design has to be fashionable or up to date, or aimed at getting the AGA award, or at getting into an architecture magazine, because clearly most of the architects are looking for that. And as well as this is clear, it's obvious that for the local people, sometimes this is not the important point. They don't need to get into an architecture magazine. They just need something that they can own. And it's very important to balance the extent of progressiveness and newness in this design, because it has to be there. It has to create that feeling of the new life coming, but it has to be limited by the ability of the local people to own this design, to feel that this belongs to them, that was made for them, not for some aliens who landed in their village. This is also something very important.
That's very important, the ownership. Now, I think we've gone really out of time, because we're supposed to finish in 70 minutes, and now it's an hour and almost 2 hours. Khadija, back to you, and thanks for everyone for their participation.
Thank you.
I think Khadija left us, huh?
We are still here.
Actually, yeah, I'm there. I was on mute. Actually, thank you everyone for being here with us. We did extend it. We got beyond the time allocated, but hey, that was the fun of it, because I think everybody was very engrossed in the presentation. And now, actually, I would like to turn to Bisma, because she is going to close this session, and give a little thing about the next session that we're going to move into next week. Thank you.
Thank you to all the panelists, Farooq and his team at Arkan Award Foundation, Award for Architecture. Thank you to all the attendees from across 15 countries who joined us today for participating in our first IAP and Arkan Award for Architecture webinar series. We look forward to welcoming you to the next session, which is going to be next week on 3rd July at the same time on Friday, 3rd July. So mark your calendars and we will be sharing the link soon. Thank you for joining today and hope to see you next time.
Bye, everyone. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Let's go.